The message appeared on Reddit one uneventful Tuesday afternoon. I had just settled into my usual routine of scrolling through posts and memes when something different caught my eye. It wasn't a picture of a cat in a Santa hat or a thread about a conspiracy theory. It was a post titled, "The Fate of Humanity is in Our Hands," written by a user with the strange handle Galactic Courier _42. The post was unusually long, filled with cryptic language and strange references, but the tone was immediate and serious. The user claimed to have an urgent message. Humanity's very existence was in danger. There was no immediate explanation of who the threat was or where it came from. Instead, the post hinted at a larger, far-reaching conflict involving beings who had been watching humanity for eons, observing our growth and progress, or lack thereof. These beings, it seemed, had come to a conclusion. Humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to continue. The more I read, the more unsettling it became. These beings weren't just watching from afar. They had already made their decision, and humanity's days were numbered. According to the post, they would arrive soon, ready to erase humanity if we couldn't prove we were worthy of survival. The strange thing, though, was that the post didn't just sound like a warning. It sounded like a challenge. The beings were offering humanity a chance to prove itself, but the catch was clear. If we failed, it would be the end of us. I sat back, staring at the screen, unsure of whether to laugh or be terrified. Was this some elaborate hoax? Some kind of game? Maybe it was one of those role-playing threads that Reddit was known for. But something about the post felt different. The user, Galactic Courier _42, had no other posts to his name, and the language was so specific, so detailed, that it didn't feel like a typical troll or prankster. The words were too careful, too deliberate. As I continued to read, I noticed something strange. A link embedded within the post. It was short, an odd combination of numbers and letters, but it didn't lead anywhere I could recognize. Something in the back of my mind screamed that I should leave it alone, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on it. The moment I did, the screen went black. I felt my heart skip a beat. A new message appeared, as if it were materializing out of the darkness. "We are watching you. You will soon know the truth." My breath caught in my throat. It felt like the world had shifted around me, like something was about to happen. Then, just as quickly, the screen blinked and an image popped up. A galaxy map, dotted with bright stars and lines of red that connected various points across the universe. But there, in the center of the map, was a single pulsing red dot. Before I could process what I was seeing, the screen flashed again and another message appeared. "The test begins now." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some prank. This was real. And somehow, I was involved. The world outside my window seemed suddenly irrelevant, as though my very existence had been pulled into something much larger than I could comprehend. The post had been a warning, a signal. Whatever was coming, it was already here, and I was a part of it. A few moments passed before I could process what had just happened. My heart raced, but my fingers moved automatically, typing a response into the chat window that had opened after the last message appeared. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking despite myself. The reply came quickly, as if the entity on the other side was waiting for my question. "Humanity is under observation," it said. "You are being tested." I stared at the words on the screen. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It seemed so far-fetched, like something out of a science fiction novel. But the link, the map, the strange, haunting message, none of it felt like fiction. Something was happening, and I was at the center of it. My thoughts raced, and panic began to set in. I had so many questions, but one stuck out more than the rest. Why me? What made me special? I was just an average guy. Nothing extraordinary about me. I had no special skills, no influence, so why had I been contacted? And why now? Suddenly, the chat window updated, and a new message appeared, as if it had read my thoughts. "You are not alone in this," it said. "Others have been selected. They too will play their part in the trial." That was when I noticed the notifications popping up. People from around the world had started commenting on the Reddit post, and the thread was quickly spiraling into chaos. Some were excited, others skeptical, and many were frightened, just like me. The users seemed torn between disbelief and the nagging feeling that something real was unfolding, and they weren't sure how to react. As the hours passed, new posts began to emerge from the thread. It was becoming clear that people weren't just being informed. They were being drawn into something bigger. Users from different parts of the world were beginning to report strange occurrences, cryptic messages, darkened skies, and, in some cases, inexplicable lights in the sky. I wasn't the only one who had received the strange link. As I scrolled through the thread, one post caught my attention. It was from a user named Starborn_17, who claimed to have received the same message. She seemed more prepared, her words calm, as if she had seen things like this before. According to her, the entities that were watching us weren't just some random race of aliens. They were ancient beings far older than humanity itself, who had been observing Earth for eons. "They have seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations," she wrote, "and they have judged us. What they want from us is not just our survival. They want to know if we can rise above our flaws. They want to know if humanity is truly capable of something greater." I felt a lump form in my throat as I read her words. We weren't being judged on our military strength or technological prowess, but on something far deeper, something I hadn't expected: our morality, our ability to change, to grow, to evolve. And that meant facing the truth about ourselves, our violence, our selfishness, our mistakes. Could we prove we were worthy of survival? The thought terrified me, but it also sparked something inside. It felt like the beginning of something monumental, something that would change everything. I found myself pacing around my room, trying to understand what had just happened. Then, as if by instinct, I clicked the link again, hoping for more answers. The screen flashed again, and the words, "Prepare yourself," appeared. It was the only warning I would get before everything changed. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread gnawing at me. The events of the previous day felt like a fever dream, but the message on my screen had been too real, too vivid. I hadn't imagined it. The trial was real. And now, the waiting began. What was I supposed to do next? I opened my laptop, the screen blinking to life. The Reddit thread was still active, flooded with messages and reactions from users all over the world. Some of the comments were hilarious, others anxious. But I could feel the shift. The panic was beginning to set in. People weren't just talking anymore, they were starting to act. Some were discussing meeting in person. Others were looking for ways to prove themselves worthy, gathering in private groups to prepare. And then there was a single post from Galactic Courier_42 that caught my eye. "Meet at the coordinates. Do not wait." The message was simple, but it sent a cold shiver down my spine. Coordinates? What was this? A trap? A test? Was I supposed to go to them? Or was this some elaborate scheme to draw the curious into danger? The coordinates pointed to a location in the far northern reaches of Canada, somewhere deep in the wilderness. It seemed far-fetched, like the kind of thing you would read about in a thriller novel, not a Reddit thread. Still, something inside me stirred. This wasn't just a hoax or a fantasy. There was a force behind all of this, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that it wanted something from us, something I needed to understand. I knew I wasn't alone in this. I wasn't the only one who had received the message. The subreddit Humans Against the Stars had exploded with activity. There were hundreds of posts, all from people who claimed to have received similar messages. Some were already making plans to meet, Others were sharing their own theories, trying to piece everything together. I could feel the collective weight of it all pressing down on me. I wasn't ready. I didn't have the answers. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to sit idly by. Whatever this was, it was going to change the course of humanity, and I couldn't let fear dictate my response. I couldn't stay behind and wonder what would happen. I had to face it, head on. I made my decision. I would go. Packing a bag wasn't easy. It felt surreal, as if I was preparing for an adventure. But as I packed the essentials, clothes, food, a flashlight, I felt the enormity of the situation hit me. This wasn't an adventure. It wasn't a game. I was stepping into something bigger than myself, something that involved all of humanity. The thought of meeting strangers in the wilderness was terrifying, but I wasn't the only one making the trek. The Reddit thread was full of people sharing travel plans. There were those flying in from across the globe, others who were taking long car rides into the unknown. We all had the same question on our minds. What would we find when we arrived? As I boarded my flight to the Canadian wilderness, I couldn't shake the sense that this was more than just a test. It was the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. The universe was waiting to see if we could prove we were worthy of survival. But what would happen if we failed? As the plane ascended into the sky, I couldn't help but feel like I was being pulled toward a destiny I didn't fully understand. And as the hours passed, my thoughts began to spiral. Was humanity really ready for whatever this trial would bring? Would we rise to the occasion? Or would we fail and vanish into obscurity, another civilization lost to the stars? The answer, I knew, was still out there, and soon we would all find out together. The flight to Canada felt like the longest of my life. Each minute stretched into an eternity as I stared out the window, watching the clouds swirl beneath me. I kept thinking about the message, the coordinates, and the overwhelming weight of what was to come. I wasn't the only one who had felt the call. Something about the posts on Reddit, the cryptic words, and the strange allure of the trial had drawn so many people to the same place. We were all heading toward that remote corner of the world, toward something unknown, something that could change everything. When I finally landed, the air was colder than I expected. I'd been expecting northern Canada to be chilly, but the stark quiet that enveloped me as I stepped out of the airport was unnerving. It was as if the whole world had been turned down to a dull hum, a silence that felt far too heavy. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and checked my phone. The Reddit thread was still active, and dozens of new posts had appeared. A few users had already arrived at the location, sending cryptic messages like, "The forest is watching, and the sky is different here." The further I read, the more unsettled I became. This wasn't just about proving humanity's worth. It felt like something was waiting for us, something ancient and unexplainable. I rented a car and made my way to the coordinates. The drive was long and winding, taking me deeper into the wilderness. The road turned into a dirt path as I neared the destination, the trees around me growing taller and more foreboding. It felt like the world had been swallowed by nature, the hum of civilization fading away the further I went. There were no other cars on the road. The only sounds were the crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional rustling of branches in the wind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that this place was somehow alive in a way that defied reason. When I finally reached the meeting point, I found a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. There were already several cars parked nearby, and a group of people stood off to one side, gathered together in hushed conversation. My stomach churned with nerves, but I stepped out of the car and approached them. The people here weren't what I expected. They were all ages, from young adults to older individuals, and each one looked just as confused and apprehensive as I felt. No one seemed to know what was happening, but there was a shared understanding among us. A sense that we had all been brought here for a reason. We had all answered the same call, felt the same pull. We were, in some strange way, connected by this moment. "Are you here for the trial?" a man asked me, his voice low and wary. I nodded. "Yeah." "You too?" He smiled, but it was thin, almost resigned. "I guess we'll see, if we're ready." There was a silence, a collective holding of breath as we all turned toward the center of the clearing. In the distance, there was a faint glow. It flickered like the northern lights, pulsing in time with our hearts, growing brighter by the second. It wasn't natural, that much was certain. It felt like the very fabric of reality was bending, shifting. As the glow grew stronger, I realized that this was it. The trial had begun. No words were spoken. We all walked toward the light, drawn by some invisible force, stepping into the unknown. There were no instructions, no guides, just the sense that we were all part of something much larger than ourselves. We were ready, or at least we had to be. Whatever was coming, we would face it together, and whether we succeeded or failed, the consequences would echo far beyond this moment. The light grew brighter as we stepped closer, and with each step the air seemed to grow heavier, charged with an energy I could feel in my bones. The others around me were silent, their faces a mix of fear and determination. No one spoke, as if we were all afraid that saying the wrong thing would somehow disrupt the fragile atmosphere that had enveloped us. I could see their eyes filled with the same uncertainty I felt, and I realized we were all in this together. No one knew what would happen next, but it was clear that whatever we were about to face would be unlike anything we had ever experienced. As we reached the center of the clearing, the source of the light became visible. It wasn't just a glowing object in the sky, as I'd imagined. It was something else. The light came from a strange, ethereal structure that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm, as though it was alive. It looked like a towering archway made of shimmering energy, a gateway between dimensions. And in its glow, the world around us seemed to bend and twist. The trees, the earth, even the air around us felt different, as though reality itself was being rewritten. For a moment, everything was still. The hum of the light filled the air, vibrating through my chest. Then, without warning, the sound shifted, becoming deeper, more resonant, like the voice of the universe itself. The light flickered once, twice, and then split open, revealing a figure standing at the threshold. It was humanoid, but not in a way I could truly comprehend. The being was impossibly tall, its form shifting and fluctuating, like it was made of light and shadow at once. Its features were fluid, barely discernible, and yet it radiated a presence that was both comforting and terrifying. The being raised one hand, and without a single word, the group of us was drawn forward, as if tethered to it by an invisible force. I could feel the energy in the air intensifying, and I was no longer sure if I was walking or floating. My feet barely seemed to touch the ground as we moved closer to the entity. The others around me were in the same trance, their eyes wide and filled with awe, as though we were witnessing the most profound moment in the history of humankind. When we were all gathered before the being, it spoke. The words weren't spoken aloud, not in the way that humans communicate. It was more like a thought, implanted directly into our minds. "Welcome," it said, its voice reverberating in the very marrow of my bones. "You stand at the threshold of your greatest trial." The being paused, and I could feel its gaze upon each of us, its presence probing, searching. "You have been chosen," it continued, "not for your strength or intellect, but for your ability to change, to rise above the flaws of your species and transcend the limitations of your kind." I felt a chill run down my spine. The being's words echoed in my mind, not just as a statement, but as a question. Were we capable of transcending our flaws, of proving ourselves worthy of survival? The answer felt uncertain, and I wondered if the others around me had the same doubts. Were we truly ready for this trial? The being continued, its form shifting, its energy swirling around us like a living storm. "This is not a test of power. It is a test of your humanity, of your capacity for empathy, for growth, for sacrifice. Each of you will face a trial designed to reveal your true nature, and in the end you will be judged, not by what you do, but by how you choose to be." As the words settled into my mind, I felt a surge of emotion. I wasn't sure if it was fear, awe, or something else entirely, but the weight of the trial ahead of us was becoming real. We weren't just facing a test, we were facing a reckoning. This was our chance to prove that humanity was worth saving. Or, if we failed, we would be lost to the stars, just another experiment that had come and gone. The being's presence grew stronger, its energy almost overwhelming. "Now," it said, and suddenly we were all engulfed in a wave of light, our surroundings fading into nothingness. The trial was beginning. We had no idea what awaited us on the other side, but one thing was clear. Our choices, our very essence, would determine the fate of humanity. The light swallowed everything. One moment I was standing before the being, the world humming with its vast, unearthly presence, and the next, everything faded into a blinding white void. For a moment, I couldn't feel anything. No ground beneath my feet, no air in my lungs, no weight at all. It was as if time itself had stopped, as if we were suspended in a place between worlds. I had no sense of direction, no sense of self, only the oppressive quiet that surrounded me. Then, slowly, like a distant echo, I began to hear something. A soft whispering rising from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The voices were too indistinct to make out, but they were familiar in some way, tugging at memories I couldn't quite grasp. As the whispering grew louder, the white void around me started to shift. Shapes formed from the formless expanse. Blurred images that flickered and morphed like fractured pieces of a dream. I recognized them, or at least I thought I did. Faces, places, moments. They were flashes from my life, distorted, disconnected, and yet undeniably mine. And then, as if I had been sucked into a current, I was no longer in the void. I found myself standing in the middle of a city street. But it wasn't just any city. It was my city. Yet it wasn't. Everything looked slightly off, as if I were seeing it through a distorted lens. The colors were sharper, the edges more defined, but the people walking past were unfamiliar, their faces blurred and strange, their eyes empty, hollow. There was something wrong about them, something missing. I turned in a slow circle, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The air was thick, and the silence was crushing, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. No one spoke. No one acknowledged me. It felt like I had been dropped into a world where I didn't belong, like I was a ghost walking among the living. Then I heard it, the sound of a child crying, faint but unmistakable. I turned toward the sound, drawn to it against my will. The streets twisted in front of me, the buildings stretching upward in unnatural angles, as though they were warping to keep me away from the source of the cry. But I pressed on, pushing past the distorted streets, my pulse quickening with every step. The crying grew louder, more desperate, until I reached an alleyway. There, huddled on the ground, was a small child. She was alone, her clothes torn, her eyes wide with fear. Her sobs filled the silence, the sound of terror so raw that it seemed to echo in my chest. I knelt down, instinctively reaching out to comfort her. But as my hand hovered near her, the world shifted again, and I saw it. The darkness that had been lingering at the edges of my vision. It was moving, swirling, creeping toward us from the corners of the alley. It was an oppressive, suffocating force, something born from the deepest parts of the human psyche. The fear, the rage, the pain we so often tried to bury. The child's cries grew louder. her eyes filled with terror as the darkness closed in. But I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. The weight of the moment felt unbearable, and for the first time since I had stepped into this trial, I understood. This wasn't just a test of strength or intellect. It was a test of who we were, deep down. It was about confronting the darkness within us, the parts of ourselves that we ignored, the fears and flaws that we let fester. Could I face them? Could I confront the terror in front of me without letting it consume me? Just as the darkness was about to overwhelm us, the child looked up at me, her expression shifting from fear to something else, something almost pleading. Her eyes seemed to ask me a question, something I had to answer if I wanted to move forward. But before I could react, the darkness consumed us both, and I was pulled into a new world, the alleyway fading away as everything went black. And then the light returned. The being's voice echoed in my mind again, calm and penetrating. "What will you choose?" The blackness receded like a curtain being drawn back, and once again I found myself standing in the light. But this time it wasn't the same. The light felt colder, distant, as though it was no longer a welcoming force but a judgment. I blinked, trying to shake off the lingering dread from the alley, from the child, and from the overwhelming darkness that had almost swallowed us whole. My body felt heavy, weighed down by the choice that had been placed before me. What had I been supposed to do? What was I supposed to learn from that moment? The light around me flickered, shifting, and the being that had guided us here appeared once more. This time, its form was clearer, less formless and more defined, though still surreal. It towered over us, its presence suffocating yet undeniably powerful. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt completely exposed, as if it could see every thought, every doubt, every fear I had ever carried with me. "Did you learn?" the being asked, its voice reverberating in my mind. I wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain the torrent of emotions that had flooded me in that moment? How could I convey the terror I had felt, the helplessness as I stood frozen, knowing I should act, but unable to break free from the paralyzing fear? The being seemed to sense my internal struggle, its gaze softening just slightly, though it remained unyielding. "This was only the first step," it said. "You were shown the darkness, the fear that lies within. What you faced is the shadow of humanity itself, your collective pain, the violence, the desperation. It is not enough to simply recognize it. The question is, will you act against it? Will you choose to rise above it?" The weight of its words hung in the air like a stone, sinking deeper into my chest with each passing second. I knew that this wasn't just some ethereal test or puzzle. This was real. The trial wasn't about solving riddles or proving who was the smartest. It was about confronting our own humanity. And the darkness I had seen, the terror in the child's eyes, was a reflection of what we had buried deep within ourselves, our flaws, our mistakes, our inability to overcome the primal instincts that had driven us to conflict, division, and suffering. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to center myself. It was hard to shake the image of the child, the overwhelming weight of the fear in her gaze. But there was something in that moment that I couldn't deny. I had been given a choice, not just to face the darkness, but to rise above it. And as painful as that choice was, I knew it was the only way forward. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the others, standing just a few feet away, their faces reflecting the same mix of confusion and fear that I felt. Some were staring at the being, others at the ground, perhaps lost in their own thoughts. We had all been through our own personal trials, and each one of us had faced a moment of reckoning. But what came next was still uncertain. We weren't done yet. The being spoke once more, its voice now firm and resolute. You have been shown your nature. Now, you must decide. Will you allow the darkness to define you, or will you choose to be the architects of your own future? The trial is not complete. It has only just begun. A sudden silence fell over the group, as if we were all waiting for some final answer, some final word to clarify everything. But it didn't come. Instead, the being began to fade, its form dissolving into the shifting light, leaving us alone once more. We were left in the silence, no longer guided by the being but by our own thoughts. The trial had not ended. In many ways, it was just beginning. We would have to confront the darkness within ourselves, each of us in our own way. And in the end, we would be judged not by our past, but by the choices we made from this moment onward. For the first time since this journey had begun, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The future was uncertain, but we had the power to shape it. We had to believe that we could rise above our flaws, our darkest instincts, and create something better. The trial wasn't a test of survival. It was a test of humanity's capacity to change. And as the light began to dim, I realized that whatever came next, we were all in this together.